Beyond the headlines. This is World Insight.
The World Meteorological Organization did report periods of extreme heat are becoming more frequent, far intense and longer lasting. This summer, deadly heat waves hit Europe, with the continent reeling from record temperatures and wildfires. In the United States, July this year was the hottest July ever recorded, with the highest temperatures across the country. In Asia, Typhoon Dolphin and Typhoon Bawi have spawned strong winds and heavy rainfall. So what's really driving these changes? How can countries improve early warning systems toward greater resilience? Let's loop in our panelists. Joining us in Brussels, Wendell Trill, climate policy expert. In Beijing, Dimitri de Boer, director for China with Client Earth. He's also the special advisor to the China Council for International Cooperation on Environment and Development. Also in Beijing, Guan Dabo, distinguished chair professor of climate change researcher from Tsinghua University. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. When we are seeing wildfires, hurricanes, floods everywhere, increasingly around the world, what exactly are we seeing, Professor Guan?
Yes, we are actually seeing the strongest El Nino in the history, possibly one of the most strongest El Nino in history. It's actually created a lot of turbulence in the climate, and then we see the results of such turbulence that happened in India, in Europe, and now in China, and possibly will move to other places in the world. So this is become a new normal in the past few years of the strong climate impacts.
According to the UN Secretary General, this is only a warm-up act, quoting his phrase. What does he mean, really?
We know that the planet is continuing to warm, and so in the next decades, we know the planet's going to be even warmer than today. So what we're seeing around the world already today is particularly concerning because, even if it might look barely manageable today, with even further heat in the future, it's very difficult to predict what exactly that will do to our economies, to our livelihoods, and to nature and to agricultural production, etc. The other thing that he might be referring to is that the El Nino, the effects tend to be somewhat delayed. And so this year may be bad, but it's very likely, almost certain actually, that next year is going to be even worse.
But there's a lot of questions being asked about how do we know? When you say the weather will be warmer years later, when you say this might be attributed by El Nino, and that's likely to continue and its effect is being delayed. So how do we know? In other words, we have seen this scientific debates for long. Do we really know?
Yeah, so we have a very strong scientific consensus around the world in a UN organized group of scientists that because of climate change, predicting it is a little bit hard. So it requires people to get together and to also agree on the facts, virtually certain that humans are causing this warming, virtually certain that the planet is heating.
And while, of course, extreme weather events have always happened with or without climate change, there's been a lot of progress in what is called attribution science. So scientists that are looking at what is the chance that climate change has increased the occurrence, has increased the severity of specific weather events, and that science really has evolved enormously over the last 10, 15 years, and now scientists can, with kind of certain robustness, say that there's X% of chances, and those are always beyond the 80-90% of chances that climate change has led to increased occurrence of specific weather events and has led to increased severity of these extreme weather events. So I think that science has evolved as more and more attention is being given in the scientific world to climate change, and that it's now very clear that there is a direct relationship between CO2 emissions, temperature rise, and the extreme weather event.
I'd just like to add something here. We cannot actually predict is that how much water is going to pour from the sky into one particular region, and then what's the specific of the degrees centigrades is going to increase in one particular region. This is accurate predictions cannot be achieved in the current academic the state of art. This is something the climate scientists and the research institute keep working on. So early warning we achieve to certain degrees, but 100% accuracy predictions or projections for short term, like a minutes level of the predictions of the climate, we are not achieving right now.
In Europe, for example, the dry weather, many of the waters were dried up. Meanwhile, even the nuclear plant cannot be in operation because the temperature of the water is too high. It's going to be very dangerous. So can you help us to understand what exactly is it behind all of these phenomena? Do they really explain to us what is really happening? Go to you, Mr. De Boer, since you are representing Europe to a certain extent.
I mean, unfortunately, we're seeing these things not just in Europe, also in the United States, also in China, also in Korea, also in Japan, also in Africa. And so virtually every continent right now is experiencing heat stress to a level that we've barely seen in the past. And so a lot of records are broken. In fact, the last 10 years were all hotter than all years before that. And so there's very little question that the planet is much warmer. And that's causing all sorts of problems. Crop failures is something that we're used to. Throughout history, humanity has dealt with extreme weather affecting crops. But the scale of that is unbelievable, with the level of heat and drought that we're experiencing now. You mentioned power supply, so hydropower often has trouble functioning due to a lack of water availability, and it's the same for nuclear or coal-fired power. Even solar panels don't operate at their best under a very high temperature, but fortunately they still keep producing quite a lot of power. And so all of the systems in society they have knock-on effects. So a farmer might be able to survive this year, but next year, if it happens again, they're going to go bankrupt. And so systems fold.
Wait, I mean, we've been hearing these kind of statements about that could create fears among the public for decades since climate change has become an issue. But now people has become, should we say, a little bit fatigued about that. But of course, they are also suffering as a result of the apparent climate warming phenomena. So what is the best way really to understand the issue? Is it about fear that would make us change? Or is it about constructively building something together that would prevent the change from happening too fast? Can we really do it, Mr. Trill?
I think that what we need to look at is that there's a need for a transition. I think that has been agreed. It's part of the United Nations agreements that countries made amongst themselves that we're going to transition away from the use of fossil fuels. And so that transition can be a huge opportunity. Instead of only speaking about fear, which is part of the reality. I mean, in a way, we are currently the hottest year in a long time, but we're probably the coolest year for the next decade. So it's not going to get better soon in terms of the extreme weather events, but there is a hope that we can build a new society in a transition that offers opportunities, that offers social opportunities for many. Look at, for instance, the African continent. Solar power can bring electricity to the most remote communities that currently have no electricity. So the alternative really has a number of advantages.
All right. According to the three of you, prevention, as we earlier hoped, did not happen. Climate change, global warming. Instead, now it is only pragmatic that we are doing more adaptation. But adaptation can be a very abstract word. So what does that mean for adaptation for everybody? Go to you, Mr. Trill.
It's very clear that there's a number of things that can be done, and protecting nature is one of those elements, because nature, not only as part of nature reserves, but also trees in cities, parks in cities, etc., will help cool down cities, will offer shade, etc., etc. So there's lots of things that can be done in terms of adaptation, but also adaptive agriculture. As the professor has already said, there's a lot of impacts happening by increased warming on specific yields, etc. So changing those yields, making them adaptable to the new warming climate, etc., can be very successful.
Go to you, Mr. De Boer.
Yeah, so I would agree that the world has to do both, right? We continue to reduce fossil fuel emissions, And at the same time, we need to get much better at making our societies resilient and adapting to a warmer climate. And so both things have to happen at the same time. And I would say for, on a personal level, definitely making sure that you and your family, and especially vulnerable people, the elderly in your family, are safe from heat stress is important. At the same time, a lot of things out there, we can duck into an air conditioning, right? Every time I step into an air-conditioned space, I feel so grateful. But it also reminds me that nature can't do that. And it's even worse for nature. A lot of species can't really cope. So what we're going to see probably is the ecosystem is also going to be affected. And so protecting that nature and trying to help as much as possible the world to be able to cope with this greater heat is going to be a tremendous challenge for all of us. What is a little frustrating, I think, is that, earlier we were asking many questions about, is this real? Is this real? And I think it's so uncomfortable that this is happening to us that a lot of people can only respond with denial. It can't be true. Right? But when we're looking at the heat waves and the fires and everything around the world now, it is very difficult to ignore that something very, very devastating is happening to the world. I think especially young people will feel a bit overwhelmed by this reality. And so that's bound to create tension for all of us, also emotional stress.
Absolutely. Professor Guang.
I think from institutional level, many kind of many extreme events, such as heat, it doesn't have an institutional owner. Flooding might be, because flooding has some water or hydrology ministry, something like that. Wildfire or something, they had some institutional agency to that. But the heat is actually felt kind of between health, labor, energy, housing, different type of ministry.
Right.
And whatever the victims, death or whatsoever, it doesn't get recorded, but they are actually recorded as cardiology issues, renal issues. Doesn't matter which country, a lack of such institutional systems to manage this. I think that's from the government level of this the adaptation side.
Certainly, the Amazon is experiencing something very dramatic as we speak, so different from the earlier days. Meanwhile, you also see reports about vast deserts in Africa, for example, are having green plants growing in different parts, scattered around. That is very strange. One could imagine, one could thought, wow, this is wonderful, but that's not how nature used to be. So all these dramatic changes sporadically might seem to be congratulatory. Overall speaking, they probably together are making a very different story. So in other words, to what scale and adaptation that we are talking about, we have to have? Is it going to be too little, too late? We used to ask about prevention, too little, too late. Now we should also ask about whether adaptation is already too late or too late. Go to you, Mr. Trail.
Well, definitely, there's not enough happening. I wouldn't say it's too late. Governments can still take quite a number of initiatives, but we do see actual casualties. And if we speak about Europe, for instance, in the months of May and June of this year alone, we have recorded over 10,000 excess deaths, mostly elderly people, but also children, etc. So over 10,000 people that died because of the extreme heat that we were experiencing in Europe. That's a huge amount of people. For those, it's of course too little too late, but we can still take measures for the coming years to ensure that the impact on elderly people and vulnerable people of extreme heat, which is only one of the elements of climate change, that can be reduced by improving air conditioning, by improving how we take care of elderly people, by ensuring they drink enough, etc. So there's lots of things that can happen. And so I would say there's not enough being done at the moment, but it is not too late. We can still do much more, definitely in a region like Europe, where we have the financial capacities to take action if we really want.
In Europe, though, since Mr. Trail, you are talking about that example. For example, in France, we heard about some ministerial politicians talking about why do we need air conditioning? And of course, the public rebuffs that, saying, of course, you are working in an air-conditioned building in the office. Well, many of us do not have it in such a hot summer. We see some of these issues have become very political. Is it going to be a blessing in disguise? Or actually it's going to create even more division within society and therefore delay the real action that should be taken?
Well, I do think that there's general consensus in Europe that we will need more air conditioning than we currently have. There's also general consensus that we need to make sure that we have both the high quality of air conditioning, because one of the things that we've seen is that suddenly, because of the extreme heat, there's a rush on air-conditioned systems. Some of them are not of the quality needed. And I think that the remark from the French minister was more related to the quality than to the quantity of air conditioning. And of course, we also need to see that we have the electricity, the energy produced to make sure that those air conditionings can function. So I would say that it's only a small part of the solution, but it's definitely one of the things that we need to look at.
If I could just follow up a little bit on the air conditioning. It has become such an important story during the summer. We understand in Europe, for example, there are certain standards when it comes to importing air conditioning facilities. Some of the bars are very high, and therefore making the price for the customer extremely high, while at the same time scare away many of those that can contribute to that market. So governance related to this, regulations, rules related to the issue of adaptation, are we going to see efficient adjustment? To talk about politics in front of the climate change experts.
That it's about politics, but definitely there's a concern in Europe about protecting its own industry. And so we need to see that governments find the right balance between protecting their own industry and protecting the general public,
people,
which sometimes can benefit from imports of certain products. Definitely that is the case when we speak about solar energy. I think that it is in the benefit also of the European population to increase the use of solar power, whether that solar panels are being built in Europe or elsewhere, in this case, for instance, in China, I think is of a secondary concern. But in general, I think there is a genuine concern that, of course, we need to have the right regulations to ensure that both European industry is protected, but also that the quality of certain products is being guaranteed.
Yeah, of course, China has been quite a pioneer in using renewable energy, and that example has been shared by many others in the world. But the question really is, despite of these efforts, how much will these efforts really help with the situation about adaptation?
Very much. Basically, the rationale to slow or to decelerate the global warming, or make a more adaptation more effective, is mitigation. So first of all, the clean energy, solar, wind, they provide clean energies. They can gradually replace the fossil fuels. That's the big step forward.
What kind of timeline are we looking at, just for our viewers?
Yeah. The timelines is that currently China has roughly about less than 15% of the entire energies is coming from renewable energies, and the wind and solar itself is gonna increase to roughly about 80% of the entire electricity systems by 2050. So in the next few decades, at least in China, wind and solar, the renewable energy, would take a majority of the electricity power on that. And for the adaptation itself, which are the response to the early point, to building a solar, and then they can help the regional climate. For example, China actually building lots of the solar panels in the desert, and then we're seeing some deserts become greening, because the solar on one hand, they absorb the radiation to generate electricity. On the other hand, they provide the shade, and then there's some provide the moisture in the soil, would actually encourage the growth of the vegetation. Then that's actually also provided the evaporation from the surface. That is actually provide the marginal benefits for to changing the regional environmental conditions as well.
Many who are watching our program, knowing that our studio is based in Beijing, they would say, oh, okay, you guys are having this conversation only because China want to sell more air conditioning, want to sell more clean energy equipments to the rest of the world. You're here to do that kinds of arguments. Do you think, where do you think we should put the discussion about climate change, extreme weather, human collectively deal with its aftermath and try to adapt vis-a-vis some of the headline news that we're seeing every day, as if geopolitics is the only thing in the world? How do you think we should proportion all of this?
I mean, for the energy transition, it's pretty straightforward, right? So China's high quality and low cost green technologies are the best news for the world since the Paris Agreement. Nothing is better for the world. So now you see a drop in the price of solar panels that is so significant that the renewable energy is now much more affordable than fossil. So people in Africa, for example, we always thought we need to help the people in Africa. Turns out they're buying lots and lots of solar panels because they are now cheaper than importing fossil fuels, right? And so the economics have shifted to the degree that very soon the fossil fuels will be sort of the dinosaurs in geopolitics. And I think the question here is to make sure that other countries, people in other countries, really feel that they can take part in this new economy. Rather than giving them a fish, teach them how to fish, work with countries outside of China to form a bigger part of the supply chain for solar panels and wind and batteries and EVs. And then everybody around the world will have the tools to make all of these green technologies and feel like they're a part of this new low carbon economy that the world is embarking on. And this shift is inevitable.
Is that what's going on? Is that what's going on?
That is exactly what's going on. So it's very soon it's going to be such that the fossil industries are going to be it's more about how to transition the people working in coal mines, etc., into jobs that make sense in the new economy. That's going to be a bigger challenge in the near future.
All right. Also, Mr. Trill, your thoughts on that, the transition? We are learning from the best, whether it's China or elsewhere in Europe. How can we make the best out of the best options that we have?
Yes, so definitely there is also good news, and it has already been mentioned that solar power, for instance, is one of those nice examples. So the increase of solar power is massive, and that's largely been driven, of course, by what is happening in China, both in terms of investments as well as in terms of production. But if we're continuing on that pace, solar power will of course increase a lot in the coming decades. Now, a lot of that development is also dependent on global cooperation between countries. And that's why these international climate negotiations are so important, because they lay the groundwork for countries to start trusting each other, to see what each other is doing and how they can cooperate. And I think that is very important, that we need to see a world that is starting to cooperate even more. Of course, some of the current geopolitical events are not helping that. And some of the countries and governments in the world are not really helping global cooperation in general, but also not on climate change. And that's what we need to overcome in the coming years, to ensure that countries trust each other, to ensure that countries work together, and to ensure that countries really see the long-term perspective. And the long-term perspective is an energy transition that is undeniable. And everybody is, of course, benefiting from that transition. We need to get to a world that goes beyond individual profits from companies and looks at the general public's concerns and how we can make the world a better place to live.
Right. The other thing I really want to ask you before we wrap it up is about the new technologies. Of course, artificial intelligence is everywhere now, as we know. And it could be a plus. It could also be a challenge. For the plus part, we have seen some examples. What I know, for example, coming from China, Mazu platform, which is a meteorological predicting mechanism. China provided to some of the least developed economies, for example, on the African continent, to help them to understand better about weather forecast, to provide more information to the public and their industries. But there's also issues as to whether AI could help us to navigate better the latest change in climate, the global warming, the extreme weather. Your thoughts, Mr. De Boer?
Yeah, so this is a terrific initiative. Predicting, being able to accurately forecast extreme weather can reduce losses tremendously. Imagine if you're running a farm and you know that it's going to be certain extreme weather, you can avoid making investments that you would otherwise lose. And it's the same with so many other sectors in society, power sector especially, and other activities. Now, being able to do that well requires a lot of satellites and a lot of technology. And China has now deployed an amazing system to also help other countries with that. And that's really important. So many countries in the region just don't have the capabilities to do that. And it's really not that big of an investment. If China wants to have this for China's sake, sharing a lot of the results and the fruits of such systems with other countries is relatively low cost. And so it's a really great way to help other countries, and share some of China's latest technologies.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. We would love to thank you for your contribution and also your insights. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight. Check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. Thanks for being with me. Bye for now.